It's Tuesday, March 18th, 2014, and you're listening to SYN Boldly, the podcast, the Sign Your Name Project. I'm your host, Trey Comstock. With me this week is a lovely Stephen Doss.
Thank you for calling me lovely.
On tonight's episode, we'll be talking about the various trials going on in the United Methodist Church, talk about Fred Phelps' imminent demise, and a somewhat extended discussion of religious liberty in Russia. But we start tonight with an update on the various trials in the United Methodist Church in the news. So as ever, stay with me because this story is complicated. So remember a few months back, Bishop Melvin G. Talbert performed a wedding for two men in Alabama. Woo. Despite the express written denunciation.
Consent of the NFL?
No, just,
okay.
Hey,
don't do this, yeah.
The hey, don't do this of several important bodies, including the Bishop of Alabama, West Florida. So he did it anyways, and so the Council of Bishops recommended that he be disciplined in some way, and so that disciplinary process has been started. Complaints have been formally filed against Bishop Talbert in the Western jurisdiction. So the way this works is, since it's a bishop that's being disciplined, there will be this kind of complaint procedure where two bishops, one layperson, and one non-bishop clergy will meet in confidential sessions to decide kind of the guilt and then what should be done. This is different from the clergy trials that we've been seeing for, clergy, for, elders and deacons. This is kind of a special thing for bishops. It's the Western jurisdiction because although Bishop Talbert is retired, that's where he served when he was a bishop. And so the kind of the head of the College of Bishops, the Western jurisdiction, went ahead and formally filed this complaint, and so that begins this process. Beyond that, we probably won't hear much from this, given that it's a confidential closed-door proceeding, until after the decision arrives. Which this is the Methodist Church, so that could be a long, long time. So what it's called, the team that gathers is called a supervisory team, and they maintain the confidentiality of the supervisory response as guided by the Book of Discipline. To quote Bishop Stanovsky, who is the head of the College of Bishops for the jurisdiction, we find the confidentiality protects the integrity of the process and provides the best hope for the parties reaching a just resolution and offering healing to the church. And she asked that we uphold the supervisory process in our prayers. There's that. We kind of knew that something was going to happen. The Council of Bishops had said this must be so, and so it is so. I more bring this in just to keep y'all up to date on this story that we've been talking about. The Western jurisdiction tends to rule, slightly more in a reconciling direction.
Yeah.
As a jurisdiction, this is the home of CalPAC. And
CalPAC has said we're going to just slap we're going to put all options on the table, but you're getting a 24-hour paid suspension.
But you're getting a 24-hour paid suspension. So this is, Western jurisdiction, I think, as well as the Northeastern, which we're going to talk about here in just a second, are places where you can kind of get a fair consideration of these issues, or at least fair as I look at it.
Yeah.
Were I Rob Renfro, I think this would not be where I would want this trial to happen.
Right. It's one of those where it's like, it's fair when it's on your side. I'm sure the people who are on the more
self-described
orthodox
we are self-described reconciling.
Yeah. Those are saying like, well, southeastern jurisdiction is where this should have had it because that's where it is, and he would have gotten a fair trial there too. Even though the southeastern jurisdiction is traditionally more right of center.
More right of center.
And there's nothing, there's nothing wrong with that if that's, how you view it and you think that that's a good view. And, we're not trying to say that they're not loving or anything. It's just we find our side a bit more.
Well, I think I find the arguments on this side of the issue more convincing. Right. It's not like I'm not familiar with the arguments on
on both sides.
On both sides.
Both sides. Let's just say both sides.
You and I both grew up with them.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm very aware of them, and I'm very aware that very good Christian people can hold views that are different to mine.
Yes,
I mean, many in my congregation would thoroughly disagree with me. I love my congregation. They do great church there.
Yep. And I think, you want the bishop to get a fair trial, and I think the Western jurisdiction is a good place to get that. And I also, I also appreciate the fact that they're making it closed. I think one of the things we got with the Schaefer one was that it was so open in the air, and I appreciate the transparency of the process and stuff. It just sometimes it brought out the worst in people.
Sure, and also it turns this into a spectacle.
Yeah,
and
it's and it turns it into, look at the crazy Methodists. This is what they all believe, and they're behind the times. When the Methodist Church is surprisingly progressive in almost every other.
I mean, certainly as it relates to poverty and social
justice, immigration.
Even
reproductive rights.
Even going back historically, issues of slavery. I mean, there were branches of the Methodist Church that took the right step forward on that.
Yeah.
So, and John Wesley himself was kind of very outspoken there. So, we have this history of, if not social progressivism, at least, really thinking through what is the side of love in these issues. I mean, that's kind of John Wesley's core to Christian perfection or whatever is love.
Yeah.
That the core of it is that there's only room for love in your heart. And so I just feel like the stances that are being taken in many sectors of the Methodist Church do not represent love in our hearts.
Right.
They represent fear or, to me, just not understanding the core message of the Bible.
Right.
And reading that as a different way. So speaking of reading that in a different way, what's going on up in New York?
Oh, okay. Now it's Stephen's time to shine.
I'll throw it to you. That was a pitch.
As a pitch. I missed it completely. I was like, this is a good discussion. Oh, it's my turn to talk now. So what happened in New York was Reverend Ogletree, who is a retired United Methodist minister, former dean of the Yale Divinity School, he married his son.
Well, he didn't. He performed the wedding.
Okay, yeah. There we go.
Language is very important.
Language is wonderful. I said that and I had a smirk to see if Trey picked up on it. Yeah, he performed the marriage of his son, and his son married his the person he loved, who just happened to be a man. It was a same-sex marriage, and he was brought up on charges in the New York Conference of the United Methodist Church. And at first they said, we're going to pull back and we're going to see if a trial is the best thing to do. So he was brought up on charges, but they postponed his trial until they made a decision on whether or not to go for it. And just this week, they decided that they weren't. They said that something along the lines of, the trial culture in the United Methodist Church is not working. We can come to an agreement outside of having all these trials. Which is what they did. So I don't think Ogletree's going to have any, or if any, disciplinary action, very, very little disciplinary action taking against him, because, it's one of those, the conference decided, no, it's not what we're supposed to be doing, and it's not showing Christ's love by having all these trials and all these people come out of the woodworks and saying, you're right, you're wrong, you're right, you're wrong. It's detrimental to the church as a whole. Sometimes it shows the worst in people. Oftentimes it shows the best in people. When people come together for causes like this, and to make sure that, everyone has their opinion heard and all that stuff, but they're like, it's not worth it in the end. So Trey, I see that you have the news report in front of you. You're skimming it, perusing it.
I'm fact-checking Rune's podcasts. It looks like there, in terms of the official statements, I don't see any announcement of what if any disciplinary action was taken.
Right, I didn't think there was any.
I'm trying to try to pin down, I like accuracy, and all we do.
You know, I like just making blanket statements.
Yeah, I know. I've noticed that. Oh.
Well, I make blanket statements because I know the gist of things. I just don't know, like, the specifics. So I'm not going to say he got 400 years of purgatory.
Yep,
that is what it is? Okay.
400 years.
I don't even think Catholics believe that anymore. But if you are Catholic and you listen, please email us at synboldly@infear.org.
So there's a paragraph on how trials suck. I agree.
They do, yes.
In consideration of to provide spiritual, pastoral, and intentional of these committed in my car, I call for and commit to cessation of church trials. I understand that nothing in this agreement deprives any clergy person of his or her constitutionally guaranteed right to a trial. Joins the providers. Well, this remain a result of the ongoing. There doesn't seem to be the bishop.
It sounds like he's saying that trials stink. We're not going to do one. If we have to do a trial, then it's going to be less stinky. And we're not going to give anyone... It sounds like they're not taking away the right for people to bring up people on charges for stuff. It's just as like in this case, there's a better way to do it. And I think that's the way all these trials should be handled is...
Okay, so here's what happened. He officially waived his right to a trial.
Okay.
Which means the bishop imposes a punishment without a trial.
Yeah.
Okay? And because theoretically a trial could protect you, right? So then it's just not an as arbitrary a decision. It's a decision rendered by a group of your peers rather than just rendered by your bishop. He waived the right to that.
Right.
And part of his whatever is that he needs to participate in a forum, a discussion forum on the issue of same-sex marriage within the United Methodist Church.
Good. I think he would be a great voice in that.
Right. And so
he's like, hey, you're going to be at a panel discussion.
Right.
Well, for some people that would be a horrible punishment.
Sometimes sitting through panel discussions.
Exactly. That's the next punishment is if he does it again, he has to sit through a panel discussion on same-sex marriage.
Okay, so yeah, here I'm actually looking at the resolution. Agreement for a just resolution. Point 1, Dr. Ogletree agrees to forego his constitutionally guaranteed right for a trial by his peers.
So he says no trial.
No trial. Point 2, Dr. Ogletree agrees to make himself available, health permitting, for at least one public forum to be convened by the auspice of Bishop Martin McLee to reflect theologically, spiritually, and ecclesiologically on the nature of the covenant that binds us together in the United Methodist Church.
You basically talk about why we're Methodist.
Why we're Methodist and what it means to break a church law and still feel like you're... And then Bishop McLee commits to a cessation of church trials for conducting ceremonies which celebrate homosexual unions.
So the bishop is saying we're not going to have trials on this anymore.
And not just for Ogletree, for anyone who's brought up on conference. Charges. And then Bishop McLee promises to hold at least one of these forums, hold a forum dealing with the matter of human sexuality in the United Methodist Church. So, you want to
So basically, that's kind of like the best of all possible things. It's like your punishment is you're going to talk about why this is important to you,
or why it's important to you, and
why you did what you did,
and kind of what place does civil disobedience have within the covenant of the church, which I think is a reasonable discussion to ask someone like Ogletree to have. Exactly,
it's one of those where it's like, hey, why do you think this is important? He needs to be able to speak his mind and not have to worry about
and also have his views challenged in a public yet reasonable way. A discussion forum is a place for another reasonable Christian, and I can build a reasonable argument that said, look, this is partly why I don't do gay weddings.
Yeah.
You committed to this covenant, and what does it mean for you to break that covenant?
Yeah.
And I think he can offer a reasonable response, and we can have dialogue about these issues, and we can disagree, and there's even shades of meaning on both sides of the aisle. Because, I think that I should be able to do, same-sex marriages.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I currently don't.
Because there's a rule stating that, And
it's not just because there's a rule. It's because I've actively signed on to that rule.
Yeah.
Okay? And
it's not like if me as a layperson, if I go out and get ordained online, have my name at the State Department. I'm not Methodist clergy. I'm not representing the United Methodist Church.
And
I'm not representing the Book of Discipline. So,
I mean, part of my kind of active oath is to uphold the Book of Discipline to the best of my abilities. And right now, for me to actually perform, I advocate for the changing of the discipline.
Right.
I personally do not advocate for the breaking of the discipline, which is what Dr. Ogletree did.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with his stance. It's just not the choice I've made. And I would love to have a conversation with Dr. Ogletree in a safe space.
Let's try to get him on the podcast.
Sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
Our 100 listeners will be like, "Oh, that's awesome."
Hey, it'll be a heck of a get.
We could get up to 105.
Hey, we're gonna have a few guests on the show here in the next few weeks. So
that's awesome. One of them will not be Fred Phelps.
One of them will not. Yeah. So it's not often that we talk a lot about Westboro Baptist. They're the, I'm going to say some words I find objectionable, but it's the easiest way to describe Westboro Baptist. They're the folks who go around to, like, military funerals and funerals of prominent actors and major religious conferences and wave signs that say, like, God hates fags.
While I was at seminary, they protested the Emory Hillel House and Grady High School.
When I was at a general conference, they protested there, and I stood across the street from them in a silent and peaceful protest holding up a sign that simply said, God loves all. So, I mean, I think, many of us have had our own interactions with Westboro Baptist. They are famously headed, or were famously headed, by Fred Phelps, who was kind of the patriarch of the family.
Who was surprisingly liberal when it came to civil rights issues in the 1960s.
Yeah, he wrote a letter to Ronald Reagan that he was messing with church and state. Like, fascinating stuff. But, so, there's two pieces of news here. One, Fred Phelps has been excommunicated from Westboro Baptist Church. That is to say that not only is he no longer the head of Westboro Baptist, he is no longer officially connected.
He's not even a member anymore.
He's not even a member. And two, he is in hospice and is expected to pass away soon. So, this may be the first time I will say this, but please keep the Phelps family in your prayers.
Because no matter how angry and how hateful a person is, death is hard.
Death is hard, and death is hard on a family. And to a certain extent, especially a family that's as close as that one. And so, pray for them. I certainly will. I will stand on the floor of my church Sunday morning, and I will offer up a prayer for the Phelps family. Because there was this, remarkably incendiary headline on HuffPo that was like, should we cheer for his death? And no, certainly not from a Christian perspective. No. Do I disagree fundamentally with what he did?
Yes.
Yes.
Except for the civil rights lawsuits in the
civil
1960s.
Okay, but like his post-civil rights work, his anti-LGBTQ
his anti-LGBTQ and his anti-progressive Christianity stance and his...
And, I mean, he probably thinks I'm going to hell. I don't think he's going to hell. I don't believe in hell, so that's a really easy statement for me to make. But...
We can have a big discussion about that later
someday
on.
We should. If we haven't already, I can't even keep track.
I think we probably
26 episodes in, it just can't.
According to my count, it's 45.
You've aged us faster than but I think it's interesting. So apparently, there's no official confirmation of why he was excommunicated. The rumors that I have read is that there was a power struggle on the internal of the organization as he is moving closer and closer to the end of his life, and he backed one side that lost and then kind of made a blanket statement that they should treat each other better inside the organization, and that's why he got excommunicated, because people didn't take too kindly to that. Some of his already excommunicated children have kind of been speaking out about that their father is passing away and how they're still being kept from being able to visit him because of the tensions that exist within that family. So like I said, just, pray for the Phelpses. We're not talking about this news story to kind of laugh on his grave, dance on his grave or anything like that. We just want to bring it up, that it is You know, a major piece of news that touches on a lot of the issues that we talk about. I think that Westboro Baptist will continue. His eldest daughter, who's a lawyer, has kind of been the ones doing a lot of the spearheading lately anyways. And she's been kind of one of the prime movers in probably the past 10 years.
I think, she's usually the one that's on TV when they're interviewing someone.
And he wasn't at the protest that I witnessed, but she was.
Yeah.
So, I think Westboro Baptist will keep being Westboro Baptist. They've just lost their titular leader.
And, and who knows, maybe without that figurehead at the beginning, it'll dwindle and dwindle and dwindle, which, I mean, an organization that hateful, it needs to go away. And especially an organization that is that hateful, that claims to be a church, that totally, goes against what God's word ultimately is, which is radical hospitality and love. They
seem to, I did a lot of kind of investigation studying of them when I was in college, because I studied internet movements, and so they do a lot of their organizing via the internet. And so I looked at it, and they kind of take the gospel in kind of a, the gospel is downplayed and the Old Testament is played up in really interesting ways, to the point where they believe that God hates the world.
Right.
That's actually one of their key, I'm not inferring, that's one of their key tenets. They have a YouTube video of a 3-year-old singing "God hates the world and all our children." So the kid has a slight speech impediment, so it's "God hates the world and all her children," and it's the cutest.
That's creepy.
It's the cutest, most terrifying thing.
Oh
you've
my
ever seen.
goodness, that's creepy.
But so I have a hard time. I'm no biblical literalist, but I have a hard time syncing that up with the scripture I preached on last Sunday, which is John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son." So they kind of play up the prophets in the Old Testament in some literal ways, and then downplay the New Testament in some ways that I think is somewhat inappropriate for a Christian church, and kind of do their own thing.
Well, let's call it a church that claims to be Christian.
Sure. This is not necessarily a fair comparison, because the Mormons do some wonderful work in the world, but I see them as similarly Christian, where there's...
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
So, the
wonder how our Mormon friends will take that.
No, I don't see what they're doing as Christian, but they do.
Okay.
In the same way, and that's an interesting point of discussion, right? And if they claim to be, and that's how they self-identify, okay, fine. I look at their theology, and I see that it's somewhat distant.
Okay.
And I don't mean that as a way to downplay. I don't think they're a cult or anything weird. I don't think they're negative in a way that I think Westboro Baptist is.
Okay, good.
But I think that what Westboro Baptist is doing is also very far removed from Christianity.
Okay.
Significantly, that I would almost just, they are a church claiming to be Christian, rather than what I think of as a truly Christian church. Does that make any sense?
I think so. I think it makes a little sense, because it sounded like you're like, whoa, are you saying... Because the way it initially sounded, which is why I stopped you, in which I was like, let's explain ourselves, is it sounded like you were saying a similar church to Westboro Baptist Church is the Mormon Church.
No, I think the Mormon Church is wonderful work in the world. To me, I look at their theology and go, to me, they seem too far removed from what I see as the core of Christianity.
Okay.
Which is that you don't need an additional testament. And they disagree, and they see that there is an additional testament that is needed, and that's
the Book of Mormon.
The Book of Mormon.
And not the show.
Not the show, which is also needed. Very needed. But to me, I see them as far removed from kind of core Christian theology, such to be they're kind of doing their own thing that's related. Mm-hmm. I don't like the thing that Westboro Baptist is doing. I'm fine with the thing that Church of Latter-day Saints are doing. Does it make any sense?
I'm sure it does at some point.
If not, we'll fix it in post.
Yep.
So, kind of moving on to our...
Sydney is like, no, we are not fixing it in post.
No, we're not going to fix it in post. Moving on to kind of our next topic. Russia, the Ukraine, and Crimea have been in the news quite a bit lately.
Yes, they have.
And they are this week's discussion. So, Stephen, you brought up an interesting point when we were prepping for the show, that there's an issue of religious liberty going on in Russia.
Oh, yes. As many of you know, there's a lot of stuff going on in the good old former Eastern Bloc with Ukraine, Crimea, and Russia. Well, we were having a discussion, and we're like, what's going on over there, which you can find out more when you watch the first episode of Stephen's Plains, which is coming up on Friday. I'm recording it tonight, but it's coming up on Friday, in which we will talk about just what in the blue heck is going on with the Ukraine and Crimea. But Russia is very interesting because they have it so that there is only one Christian church, and that's the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia. So if you decide that you're...
Well, there are other... There's one other denomination I know is allowed. The cat is...
SYN Boldly, cat.
Say goodnight, Elliot. Okay. Now that I'm off there with PETA as well. Wonderful. The cat's a T-Rex.
I am SYN Boldly, cat.
I am SYN Boldly, cat.
I laugh at your
pitiful podcast. Okay, great. So the Methodist Church is an official denomination in Russia.
You can hear a purr, by the way.
And we were allowed to reform because we had paperwork saying that we existed before communism.
That's
and
right.
So the rule is you can't
capitalist pigs.
You can't be a church in Russia unless you have proof that you existed pre-communism, which we happen to, and so we were one of the few that were allowed to reform.
Right.
Alongside the Orthodox Church. So keep going, please.
But, there's various laws on the books. They're blasphemy laws. That's the reason why the art collective Pussy Riot got in trouble, was because they saw that they were blaspheming the... That's right, SYN Boldly, cat. They were blaspheming the Russian Orthodox Church, and in Russia that's illegal. It carries a prison sentence. And so the big thing is Crimea, which is part of the Ukraine right now, currently.
Actually, currently, they don't think they're part of the Ukraine
Right,
anymore.
they've currently become an autonomous republic. And by Friday, they're totally going to be annexed by Russia. Let's just go ahead and say that. Sorry, spoiler alerts.
If you're listening to this on Friday, you already know
exactly. Especially when you watch Stephen's Plains on Friday. Anyway, So they're an autonomous republic, but they're going to be annexed. And Ukraine wants to be more westernized. And one of the aspects associated with quote unquote westernization is religious tolerance. In the United States, we have various laws on the books that say, that we aren't going to make you subscribe to any religious doctrine, or you don't have to subscribe even if you don't want, if you don't want a religious doctrine, by all means go ahead and have that. And
Elliot does not have
Elliot doesn't have religion. He's a Catholic.
Oh,
anywho, yeah, we peaked. And anyway, yeah, and Europe, the European Union, there's no all that stuff, which is what the Ukraine wants to belong to. They're kind of like an outside liar, and they want to go on that. So the thing is, how does that relate when there's a country right next door that's basically taking bits and pieces of your land and saying, well, now you have to be Russian Orthodox? What if you're like in the Ukraine and you're Ukrainian Orthodox, or you're Catholic?
Which especially
like the next country they're going to take, Poland.
Like the next country over, Poland. I think this is a different version of kind of Russian, the peculiarities of being Russian that happened, back in the late 40s when it was you had to go from having religion to having no religion, which was kind of one of those communist things. All of the great cathedrals got converted into museums of atheism, which is just a great, great. We have a creationist museum. The USSR had museums of atheism. There's nothing I can do.
There's going to be
short of muting your mic. it just, there's more than politics at play here. And I look at things like the voting irregularities in Crimea.
The 20,000 Crimean self-defense forces that magically showed up.
Yeah, the Crimean
and
Defense
spoke
Force
Russian.
That spoke Russian, although this is supposed to be the Russian-speaking region of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily the weird part. It's that it's vaguely larger than the Ukrainian army on its own. Recently today there were some shots fired in the region. I mean, the tensions are getting...
They were sinking boats to blockade ports so that Ukrainian shipping vessels couldn't get out of Crimea.
This sounds a lot like there's a war happening. And there's a lot tied into it besides just power politics.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, religious liberty that comes up. I mean, if you go, if you're now you're living in that area, you become part of Russia, as the assumption is going to happen, and you aren't Russian Orthodox, you might get in trouble for blasphemy.
So when I did some work in Russia the summer of 2007, we were working on installing a couple missionaries there who were going to reach out to college students. And they had a remarkably hard time doing their work in Russia. They couldn't get an official meeting space on the university campus. They, were kind of actively persecuted at times. They had to do, meetings in secret. It was really tough. The Methodist church that they were working with and that we worked with over there, Pyathagorean Methodist, kind of met just in a community center, and there was 25 of them. They were, really adorable. Really cool people. But the whole thing felt a little tenuous because they were not the state religion. There was a lot of resistance, both kind of socially and politically, that they face. It's one of the reasons we went over there just as a ministry of support. Hey, there are folks out there that are standing with you, and we're going to be in solidarity with you. So yeah, it's and that was a long time ago, almost 7 years ago, and that was in this same region too. Pyathagorean is very near Sochi, which is where the Olympics were, which is very near Crimea, which is where all the troops are that are the Crimean Defense Force, which is fascinating. I hope that there is a peaceable way out of this that allows people to believe as they choose to believe and live in the country that they choose to live in. But right now, it just doesn't look like it's going that way. I don't know.
Yeah, it's about right. Hopefully things will change. Hopefully cooler heads will prevail. I don't think we have to worry about the West versus the new Soviet Union in a war, just because that would just be the way globalization has happened. That would be detrimental so much more to Russia than to the United States.
At the moment, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as China stays out of it, absolutely.
Which they will, because who's China's biggest trading partner?
The United States of America.
America.
And their second largest trading partner in total is the European Union, I believe.
Yeah.
Which that's not a tenable situation for them. As much as, they hold a lot of the U.S. debt, but that doesn't help them unless we pay it. So.
Exactly. And we can't pay them, and we're busy paying for troops.
So, for more on this situation, tune in to the website on Friday for the first episode of Steven Splains that we're going to be filming later this evening.
It'll actually be kind of sort of humorous.
It will be kind of sort of humorous.
Or not. It may be just facts. I don't know. Haven't decided yet. We're recording in, 10 minutes?
Yeah, we're recording as soon as I can
figure something out.
But with that, if you have any feedback for this show, hopefully Kathleen will be back with us in the near future. She's still going through the interviewing process of trying to figure out what her church placement's going to be.
So keep her in your prayers. She kind of sort of knows the one that she wants to choose her. But,
Well, this is the weirdest version of Sorority Rush I've ever been through. So if you have any feedback, SYN Boldly at nfear.org, facebook.com/the Sign Your Name Project, or at SYN Boldly on Twitter. And go in peace to love and serve the Lord and end fear by signing your name. Good night. That cat.
SYN Boldly cat!
What do you mean? He's been on the show this entire time.
You totally couldn't hear him go.
Oh, you could.
Oh, yeah, I know. facetious.
It looks so cute when you do that.